early 1500s, England broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. They created a new church. It was called the Church of England. This guy, his name is King Henry, what number? 8. 8. He was king in 1534 time period. So what he did is he said, look, I don't want to belong to the Roman Church anymore. I kind of have my own way of doing things. And he basically wanted a son. And he married a girl. She couldn't provide the son. And I'll continue with the story about King Henry. It's very interesting. He had a total of 6 wives. This is the Church of England's chapel, or their cathedral. When Colleen and I were in London, we went to the St. George Cathedral. It's within the Windsor Castle. Amazing architecture, amazing history. So what happens here in England and in other European places, because they've been around for so long, when a king or queen dies, they place that body within this cathedral. So there were lots of different places, and not just monarchy, but also significant people that helped maybe a general in a war. Yes, please.
When I went to North Carolina, we toured the University of Duke, and the cathedral there had all the presidents. The presidents were all buried in that cathedral.
That
makes sense. That's kind of interesting.
Very cool.
That's so cool.
One other thing I'll share really quick, just not part of this presentation, but something that I gleaned going to Europe with Colleen, and that is when we walked the streets of London, there were so many statues. There were so many monuments that were highlighting somebody of great worth to their people. And it was like every time you turn around, there's another face carved in stone of some person that did significant something in the history of England. And I just was really moved by that, because you were surrounded by greatness when you walked the streets of London. I thought it was awesome. So here's...
Is it that old then? 1500?
No, this is way older than that. Way older. So this is my gorgeous wife. I love when she poses like that. Does anyone know who this is?
Prince Harry and
They were married at this place. So when we walked through the church, this cathedral, we were not allowed to take pictures. In fact, I saw a couple of guys like just above us, and he took out his camera and he takes a couple shots, and I was like, I thought to myself, what disrespect that you would have going in someone else's sacred place and violate the rules. Well, shortly, like within 2 seconds, some guy walks up and says, can I please see your phone?
Oh, wow.
He gets it out, he makes him delete his pictures.
Oh.
Wow.
And he continued on the thing. So they're very sensitive. Now, I found this. This was published on some newspapers, so I think with rights, they were able to put it up. When we walked through this, we went through this really cool corridor. It's hard to really appreciate this place. But once you sit on these benches and you're looking at this, there's flags and flags and these little plaques. These are all the places where knights have an emblem that have been around for 1,000 years. Have an emblem that demonstrates something that they contributed to their country. Interestingly enough, right here in the middle of the floor is where Henry VIII is buried.
Wow. Oh, buried. Oh, wow.
So when they had their wedding, she walked across the grave of Henry's great-great-great-grandfather. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Henry had 6 marriages. The first one was 24 years. The remaining 5 total less than 10 years combined. Of the 6 queens, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, each gave 1 child who survived infancy, 2 daughters and 1 son. All 3 of these children would eventually ascend to the throne: Queen Mary I, Queen Elizabeth, and King Edward VI, respectively. Here are the 6 wives, and I just want to point something out that's interesting. She was divorced, she was executed, she died, she was divorced, executed, widowed.
Wow.
The first one, Catherine of Aragon, was what caused the Church of England to be formed, because he wanted a divorce, she couldn't produce a son, and he argued with the Pope and said, fine, I'll make my own church. Right? Mary came from Catherine, Elizabeth from Anne, and Jane produced Edward. Well, when King Henry VIII died, oh, I gotta say this is interesting. See Catherine Howard, the one on the bottom? She was executed at the Tower of London.
Oh, wow.
So when Colleen and I passed by this on this little ship, this little boat thing, they pointed it out. So that's the Tower of London. So King Edward, so he becomes king at 9 years old, and at age 15 he becomes really sick. And because he became sick, Everyone around him was worried because he was a Protestant and they wanted the kingdom to remain in the Protestant control. So quickly, they put in his cousin, Lady Jane. She was a 9-day queen. She was queen for 9 days because her cousin, the sister of Edward, said, "Not happening. I am queen." So she stepped in and she assassinated her cousin.
Oh, wow.
They called her the 9-day queen because she was only alive as queen for 9 days. In this particular moment, the queen reaches down and she says, "I can't find the block." So what's happening here is the priest is helping her find the block. So the butcher, or the axeman, the executioner, and she says something interesting. Right before she's executed, she says, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit." And it was one quick swallow. This is Queen Mary. I want to draw your attention to something very interesting about Queen Mary. She has a name, Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary because of when she became queen, she was a Catholic. Edward was a Protestant. This cousin was a Protestant. She comes in and she says, it's Catholicism. Anyone else who doesn't believe what I believe, dead. She executed 280 Protestants plus the 9-day queen. So she ruled for a long time. She was very aggressive. She pushed Catholicism. And she killed your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, John Rogers. John Rogers was a direct descendant to you guys, which I just want you to understand. John Rogers was a fascinating person in history. When Pauline and I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, we started walking through, and I love artwork, I love architecture. This place like blew my mind. There's so many fascinating things, and it's so rich historically. And she comes across this one panel, and inside that panel, I was like, "Babe, did you just realize what you came upon? This is the original book that John Fox wrote, where he listed every single one of the martyrs under Queen Bloody Mary." And I'm like, "This is the original book."
Wow.
And can you see how big that thing is?
Wow.
And your guys' ancestor is written in here. I'll say one other thing too, parenthetically. So this is the building, and right down the street is where the church house is. So Pauline and I went to the church. It's a really beautiful building. And on our way back, my friend who invited us to London said, "You gotta stop and you gotta look. The craters that you see there," he said, "those are from World War II,
Oh.
when they started bombing London.
Oh, wow.
They just never fixed this on the side of that building." And they said, "We aren't going to fix it because we want to remember this incredible thing that we as a people were able to defeat the enemy when they came onto our lands." John Rogers, your ancestor, why is he fascinating to me? Because he helped a guy named William Tyndale translate the Bible into English. We have the Bible in English today because of your ancestor who worked on it. John Rogers was convicted under Bloody Mary. He had 9 children, and one that was actually, right, it's defined, a baby at the breast of the mother. When he was taken to the town square, 9 of his children, his wife, and this little infant witnessed his execution. And why was he executed? Because he was not Catholic. And he had to denounce his wife. As a Protestant minister, you can have a family. As a Catholic priest, you cannot. And while he was burning, do you know what he did? I just think that's fascinating. This talks about the fact, this is out of that book, it talks about his 9 children that came. So here's again, like I mentioned, everywhere you go in London, you see like a statue or a bust of someone. This is called a bust, and this is your ancestor, John Rogers. This is something I found in William Tyndale. They worked together to put the Bible into English. So after Bloody Mary ended, Queen Elizabeth showed up. When she passed away, I think this is a beautiful painting of the cortege in 1603 when she died, and it has a flag or a banner from each one of their ancestors. What I love about Europe is this connection to family. Look at each one of these flags represents a family that this royal member inherited by being born into that family. I think that's fascinating. Here comes King James. King James produced the first version of the Bible in English. So we call this what? The King James Version of the Bible. So we think King James and William Tyndale and your ancestor John Rogers. So what's fascinating to me is, imagine if you lived during this time period, and one moment the king is Protestant, the next moment the queen is Catholic, and it's like this political whiplash. So a group of people who were really upset with some of the things that the churches were doing, they decided to break away. The pilgrims that we celebrate during Thanksgiving come from this movement. They were called separatists. They wanted to separate themselves from what was happening. So what they did is they grabbed a group of people and they moved to Holland. Holland is not too far away from England. You have to get on a boat to cross the English Channel. They stay for about 10 years, and then they realize that we are most likely going to lose our English heritage and our children. Why? Because it was so liberal there. They were allowed to do things that other places didn't allow. Now, I'll tell you something else that's fascinating to me. I went to Germany in 2019, and Carson and I, so this is Conley, Petra, she's the multi-billionaire, and right here, so I'm standing where she told me to stand because she hurt her ankle. She wanted to hide the brace on her foot. So, Carson and I, after visiting with Petra, we went to a place in Amsterdam, in Holland, and we went into a place called the Rijksmuseum. This is a painting of the Dam Square. And this was a picture I took as I walked out my hotel room. Look at when that painting was painted. 1672. Doesn't that building look about the same?
Yeah.
I was really fascinated by that. And I'll tell you what also was interesting to me. Why did this original group, why were they not settled in Holland? Because they were afraid they were going to lose their children, spiritually lose their children. When I was there, we get in the taxi cab with Carson, and we have to get to our hotel room, and Carson's like, hey, so what do you recommend we do here? And the taxi driver says, well, do you like to smoke? Because you can smoke marijuana here, it's legal. And I said, no, we're not really into that stuff. He goes, do you like prostitutes? You can have prostitutes here, that's legal. I was like, well, I actually don't do that either. And he says, well, and he gave us some things that we could go see. All right, but that stuck in my mind. I thought, interesting. 400 years ago, that building looked like this. The building still looks like that. 400 years ago, the pilgrims were worried they were going to lose their children because it was so loose. You could do anything. Today, you can still do anything when you're Amsterdam. Some things don't change, and I thought that was interesting to me. So what happened is they leave Holland, they go to London, and this is very interesting. They get on a ship called Speedwell. Once they get to Plymouth, they take off, and then they find out that there's a leak in the ship, so they got to go back. And this time they get in the Mayflower. As they get in the Mayflower to leave, there's a violent storm. And my great-great-great-grandfather fell off the ship. His name was John Holland. He's in the water. Just so you know, once the Mayflower passes through, there is not another ship coming in a long time. So this is your only ride, right? So you better hang on. So he hangs onto this rope, gets back inside the ship, and makes it. This is a picture.
Dad.
Yes?
If he didn't make it on, would I not be here, Miss?
Correct. Validate your position in the world because someone held onto a rope. And I want you to think about that. Because sometimes in life, you get thrown off the boat. And if you don't hang on, think of everything that is lost after you. John Howland, I'll show you a picture at the end of the presentation. Out of John Howland have come presidents of the United States. Winston Churchill is a descendant of John Howland. My great-grandfather, Ira Earl, is also in there. So here's an interesting picture that I thought was cool. More stuff. So what happens is this. When they land in the Americas, if you can see up here, there's a little triangle that says first landing on the Mayflower. Can you see the land configuration? Isn't it interesting? It's almost like a bowl. Now why, if you were in a ship, why is a bowl like this? Why is that valuable? What happens to the waves that are coming at you? Right? So a harbor is usually a place that's protected from the waves. This place has a natural protection. So when they got here, it was a natural place. Arrow on the little leg is where they landed the first time. Then they went over and inhabited the land on this other side. This is a painting when they first landed. This is what it looked like when they set up their shop. And I'll just read this really quick. One day Samoset, he's a leader of the Abenaki, and that's his Kanto, and his name was Squanto. They visited the settlers. I want to point out something interesting about Squanto. Squanto's an Indian, Native American, and he was stolen by the people. You guys ever sing the song for Pocahontas? John Smith. His crew really did steal people. He stole this kid, Squanto. Squanto ends up going to Europe, spends several years in Europe, learns English. So I just want you to think about it. You guys just came from Holland, you just landed, you had a really crazy experience getting here, you set up your camp and everything, and some guy walks up and he speaks English. I mean, could you imagine how crazy that is? So obviously Squanto becomes really good friends with the captain of the ship, whose name is William Bradford. He was the first bishop in America. And he's one of my great ancestors, William Bradford. So they became really good friends. I like this picture. What's up? Okay, so John Smith is the guy that stole these Indian youth. They established Jamestown. Jamestown, compared to Plymouth that was established by the Pilgrims, just has a very different significance to me historically. I'll cruise through here really quick. What happens is this. The Native Americans that were here were worried that these new people that had arrived would pose a threat. So what they did was, there's one day when the English are out hunting and they hear some gunfire. So these Native Americans think a war has started. So they come with their army to see what's going on, and they find out that these English are actually out trying to hunt for deer. And so what happens is, they kind of create this friendship. And as they create this friendship, they trade things together. And the English are taught how to plant corn. They would put fish in the ground and the seed on top, and the corn would grow better. This is interesting. Squanto tells Samoset that he would stay with them and help them. He teaches them how to hunt, fish, and farm. He helps the English create a truce with the neighboring tribes. Then one winter, Squanto gets very sick. He asks for the Pilgrim leader, William Bradford, to come. Bradford knelt at his bedside. "Pray for me, Governor," the Indian whispered, "that I might go to the Englishman's God in heaven." Squanto breathed his last breath in 1622, gone from the New World, but entering a heavenly one. And interesting, so to me that manifested, he had converted to his host family of Christianity. Wow. There were lots of wars. This one is interesting, right? This is Pauline's ancestral line. You see this guy right here, John Rogers? These are all people that won the Mayflower. What's that?
Thomas Rogers.
Thomas Rogers, yes. And here's why. Look at this. Here's Thomas Rogers. His dad was William. His dad was John. So think of it this way. William was watching his dad burn at the stake.
Wow.
Thomas gets on the Mayflower and heads over here. Why? For freedom of religion. Think about that. You have first-hand experience of what not having freedom of religion can do to your family, even just surviving on planet Earth. There's genuine motivation for these people to get out and start something new. I'm going to go back really quick because there's something I want to point out. I just find this so fascinating about the Puritans. Listen to this really fast. Puritans wanted the removal of all fancy and showy features of church life. Everything from the robes and adornments to the priest's door to the paintings, statues, stained glass windows of church to the use of Latin, incense chanting, and liturgy of prayers performed by priests. Instead, they proposed the simple use of English, prayers that came from the heart, not a worship book, hymns sung by the congregation, sermons not written and read by professional sermon writers in the bishop's employ, but sermons crafted by the local preacher out of his deep and prayerful study of the scriptures. Puritans expected their pastors to be very knowledgeable about scripture, not about church liturgy or doctrine like the Catholic priests. The Puritans, as with the Calvinists, wanted all the saint days and holidays done away with and stress placed on Sunday worship instead. Easter and Pentecost were the only special Sundays observed, not even Christmas, whose timing they knew had pagan, not Christian origins. The Puritans expected their pastors to be married men with families, familiar with everyday life. They thought their pastors ought to be university graduates, especially from Cambridge, which was the key center of Puritanism, well-read and learned about things of the world, such as business and technology, and able to relate to everyday lives of the parishioners to the will of God revealed in the study of Scripture and prayer. I'm legitimately on board with what these guys were crafting. Everything that was just defined makes sense to me. And I'm just really influenced in a positive way by these original thinkers. They separated themselves because they felt that when I go to church, it's not connectable to me. It doesn't make sense. So they separated out and started something that today we still inherit as a huge blessing. So that's Colleen's connection, which obviously ties to all of you, to John Rogers. This is my connection to William Bradford, because he was my great ancestor, and then also Thomas Malin was on there also.
Wow.
I've always loved this painting because they have a big feast. The Native Americans and the Puritans get together and they celebrate Thanksgiving. That was like the original monument. This is a Massachusetts snowstorm. When 101 of the original Mayflower riders or voyagers came here, half of them died that first winter because it looked like this. They were sorely unprepared for the winter that came on that first year. In Massachusetts, there's this monument that was erected in commemoration of the original Mayflower riders. Okay, so in the 19th century, the modern Thanksgiving holiday started to take shape. In 1846, Sarah Hale, editor of the magazine called Godly's Lady Book, campaigned for an annual national Thanksgiving holiday after a passage of the harvest gathering from 1621. So it wasn't until 1863 when Abraham Lincoln declared two Thanksgiving holidays, one for the Battle of Gettysburg and the other one to give in November to give general blessings. That's pretty much the gist. This is the Howland family chart. The guy on the far right, Joseph Ira Earl, is my ancestor. Then Winston Churchill, Joseph Smith comes out of this line, as is Emma Hale. President Roosevelt, President Bush, President Nixon, and President Ford all come from this guy. Hang on to that rope when life throws you overboard. I just want to share a testimony. Sorry, I threw it a little zinger, but here's President Obama saying, "Thanks for the bountiful harvest that this family works so hard for all year long. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to redistribute the wealth." All right, but I am so grateful for the ancestors that we have, for their commitment to the Lord, for the determination to carve out something better for their family. America was established on the principles of freedom of religion. You guys have an immense heritage because of your faith and the faith of your ancestors. If I could throw in a Christmas wish list, it is this: never let go of the rope. The boat or the ship called Zion will take you to a very promised place. Never let go. No matter how crazy the storm is, no matter if you get rocked off the ship, always hold on, and we'll pull you back in. And I share this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.